Great. Hello, everyone. It's very early, but thank you for coming out. My name is Adam Badrawi. I'm a partner and head of investor relations at Framework Ventures, an early crypto-native VC firm. And I'm joined today by Sergey Nazarov, co-founder of Chainlink, and Stani Kulechov, founder of Aave Labs. So let's just jump right into it, because we're limited on time. So I guess first question for Sergey. How are you seeing DeFi and TradFi working together more? And what are kind of the implications of this?
Yeah, so I think we've been talking about this in our industry for some time, and people have been expecting it for some time, and it hasn't been happening. So people got a little bit desensitized to the idea that institutions and DeFi will start working together. But now it is actually happening. For example, Aave has this great new Horizon product. That's an institutional grade version of Aave that is going to allow you to do all kinds of exciting things with RWAs, with an institutional level of backing and reliability that you couldn't get without having those RWAs backed and custodied by those institutions. This is something that has been tried before, has been worked on before, has been talked about in our industry, but now with the new regulatory environment, making the institutions comfortable enough to actually act on working with DeFi, the final hurdle is removed. This final hurdle was basically the biggest one to begin with. And what I now see is that all the yield in DeFi, all the liquidity in DeFi is very attractive to the institutional world. And what you'll basically see is institutional products like money markets and various other RWAs that are represented on chain and have lending markets around them on chain and are basically using DeFi as distribution. And Aave, I think, will be, as it is now, for lending, the main channel for that distribution.
Stani, let's have you jump in and give a little bit of color there. Aave is probably one of the most famous lending apps out there, DeFi apps out there. I think you can give us more direct color there too.
Yeah, I think there's obviously an evolution to get that how we actually reached to this point, and DeFi has been a very great environment of building financial algorithms, and then serve those different financial algorithms with different use cases to users, essentially. And a lot of these algorithms were using assets that were very native to the blockchain space. And now more with the tokenization, I would even say that tokenization goes as far as seeing the first stablecoins on chain. So basically USDC and so forth. They are a prime example of tokenized assets, something that has value outside of the blockchain ecosystem, but is represented on chain and can be transacted, can be programmable, and reflects the value that it is granted on off chain. And now, for example, if you look at the whole Aave protocol across multiple different markets, so it's currently at Ethereum and other L2s, and we can see that a lot of the activity is to consume stablecoins, getting yield on stablecoins, borrowing them, and they're backed by native assets. But now, with the idea of tokenization, we're moving towards a direction where what else we can actually bring on chain that can be more transparent, can be dealt with more efficiently, and more programmatically. So I just think that we're moving towards a direction where all these assets that we have in more traditional financial sense are moving from paper, digital, into on-chain. So the substrate of the actual execution environment is changing. And that brings us assets such as, for example, treasury bills that has been growing, money market funds that are coming on chain. And I think the more time goes on and more interest and expertise there is for tokenizing assets, we will see actually product offerings that are moving upwards on the risk curve as well. And Horizon market that the Aave Labs is proposing simply is an ability to connect both worlds in the sense that you can use these permissioned assets, which can be securities, use them as a collateral to borrow stablecoins against them to finance different types of financial goals for institutional users. So I think the tokenization piece is really important, and from Chainlink's partnership, what we're excited about is to understand how do we make these off-chain assets more auditable and bring the trust of these assets on-chain and more programmatic data streaming as well. And I think that's a really big component, because once you move into an environment where the execution is happening programmatically, you need to trust the information. You basically want to have a very reliable data source and a very reliable also smart contract-based protocol.
Very cool. So let's shift gears just a little bit. As it's apparent to everyone here, we're very much in a new regulatory environment. We have the stablecoin bill, the market structure bill coming through Congress. We have, Sergey, you were speaking to the President of the United States 2 weeks ago. It's a very surreal moment, I have to say. But how would you say this recent regulatory shift, this positivity, is, what potential does it have to impact DeFi specifically?
Yeah, so it's basically the key unlock that I think our industry was waiting for. I think Bitcoin transactions and kind of the early versions of DeFi were for one group of users, kind of the DeFi degen community, which we all love and are a part of, and is great and is going to continue and is going to grow massively. But I think there's now another community forming, which is the institutional DeFi community. And that institutional DeFi community is going to eat up more and more of the global financial system. And I think the people in Washington, D.C. understand this. They understand that the internet-based financial system was a transition from paper, and now there's a transition from the internet-based financial system to the Web3 financial system. And that understanding definitely did not exist there 4 or 5 months ago, because they were still thinking about how do we just stop in everything, how do we slow everything, how do we kill everything, how do we not allow anything to be transacted or any teams to be in the US or any of this stuff. So it's a massive, massive shift. And I think they're sometimes thinking about how do I encourage teams to come back to the US. But I think what will actually be the more important outcome due to the global nature of our industry is how do all the assets get issued in the United States? And then how do those assets go into the most reliable DeFi protocol like Aave to be lended against and all those type of things. And it's not necessarily critical that the team that runs Aave or the DAO or the contributors are all in the US. What's more important is that the DeFi system, the DeFi ecosystem can function in the US financial system, right? And that's kind of the goal that we're pushing for very heavily there. And that I think is going to help DeFi grow to completely new heights.
Anything to add, Stani?
No, I definitely agree. It's, in sort of way to think about decentralized finance is that it's a very asset agnostic in the sense that whatever financial assets that are issued, for example, in the traditional finance, they're also applicable and can be used in decentralized finance. Decentralized finance is simply a kind of a backbone of financial algorithms, and it essentially means that it's the most efficient way to transact value. And I personally believe that at some point, with the help of tokenization, a lot of this value will be sitting in decentralized finance and will be accessible to the global users. We at Aave, for example, are trying to think about and solve things like how do we produce yield for 8 billion people? What's the future is going to look like with a more decentralized environment where everyone has equal opportunities to participate? And I think from US perspective, what's interesting is that if this innovation of financial assets can be issued directly here, they can be represented on chain and distributed across the globally in the most transparent, efficient, and a trusted way. And I think that's where kind of like the regulation fits in on how we actually make it happen here.
So let's talk a little bit about the projects that you folks are both working on. How would, I guess, Aave's lending markets and Chainlink's oracles fit with this next stage of DeFi? Can you share a little bit of insight there? I guess, Sergey, to start with you.
Yeah, sure. I think there is there are two big dynamics that need to be understood. One thing is that in finance, because it's a matter of creating returns with a certain level of risk, or with as low level of risk as possible, there is a natural conservatism that creates consolidation, where you have things like JP Morgan in the traditional financial system because they are viewed as the most, or one of the two or three most reliable systems or banks or asset management firms to put your value into, right? So there's always going to be a very large, probably the predominant group in any financial system that wants yield and wants returns, but they want to do it with the highest possible level of reliability and therefore the lowest level of risk. That's just a very natural thing in all financial systems. And so the systems and the protocols in this case that provide that reliability, like Aave, because for me, Aave is basically the JP Morgan of DeFi, right? It's the reliable place to put your capital, participate in DeFi in a way that you have the lowest possible risk due to its reliability, its track record, and how seriously it takes security, right? And then when you look at things in the traditional financial system, the firms that create the most reliability, they take security and reliability very seriously, right? So they have many different systems, redundancies, backups. They think through that very deeply, just like the Aave team thinks through it very deeply. And that's where Chainlink comes in, where Chainlink is basically infrastructure that creates that reliability on certain key dimensions around data, around cross-chain, in the RWA category, proof of reserves to prove things about the underlying asset. We are going to have something called proof of composition, where we prove more details about the asset, like the yield of the treasury or who the custodian is. So basically, Aave is having a very high standard for security and reliability, and Chainlink is having a very high standard for certain key pieces of infrastructure. And when you combine the Aave contracts together with the Chainlink infrastructure, you get this highly reliable JP Morgan level DeFi protocol. And the other concept is relatively straightforward. It's that all of these systems, the Aave contracts and the Chainlink oracles, are composable building blocks that others in the community can reuse to build, so that you might not always be using Aave through directly Aave, but because people are using the building blocks, you're fundamentally in the Aave ecosystem and using that set of contracts and therefore using that Chainlink infrastructure, right? So you really want the most reliable protocol on the most reliable infrastructure, but you want it to be built in an open, composable way where others can build on top of it and with it and reuse it. That's where I think we are now already, and we're just going to expand that vision as the market grows, which I think will be successful due to the need for reliability in financial markets.
Stani, anything to add?
Yeah, and the reliability kind of touches the idea of resiliency in maybe from a perspective of when we are and have this decentralized execution environment that every market participant can rely upon. And when we think about the whole system of decentralization, it means basically if one server somewhere goes down, the system still works efficiently. And you can transact 24/7. From that perspective, what we focus in Aave is how do we ensure that the actual smart contract code base and the deployed protocol can be resilient against different types of risk factors. So obviously, over the years, Aave has grown up to 35 billion net deposits, a lot of stable coins, for example, and it has automated liquidation mechanisms. And with the couple of months ago, we liquidated over 200 million without actually affecting the protocol in any ways. And that type of resiliency showcases that you can use a piece of infrastructure that is decentralized and configure it in a way that it withstands the market conditions and different kinds of risk factors. And what Sergey mentioned about the building blocks, what I like about that idea is that then you can take this infrastructure and use it on different types of assets, RWA assets, and different asset classes, and figure out the pricing with Chainlink and make this market available. So you can use securities, for example, as a collateral, borrow capital against those assets, and provide more efficient infrastructure and more add more capital efficiency to any types of financial products. And I think that's a really exciting direction that we're heading towards. And from a decentralization perspective, you can start actually choosing different kinds of other building blocks that makes the product as a whole. So our kind of like vision is that a lot of this technicality is outside of traditional asset managers' scope, in the sense that you could actually go at some point launch an RWA and make it available on Aave without actually doing much of that technical lift. And that creates a lot of empowerment for a lot of asset managers and on the finance industry.
So I guess final question, because we're a bit low on time, but I want to make sure both of you have time to answer. Mainstream adoption in our industry has long been talked about, but I guess what do we at this point where we're like it seems like we're having a lot of momentum in our industry, a lot of things are converging, the regulation is here, or almost here, the technology is almost here. What do we need next for I guess mainstream adoption of DeFi, and what does mainstream adoption of DeFi even look like? I guess Sergey, why don't you jump into it first?
Yeah, sure. I think you fundamentally need highly reliable markets and financial products like Aave, where you have the reliability that people expect from the traditional system, or even better reliability. And once you provide that reliability and security, that's table stakes, right? And there's not many protocols that provide that, and definitely the leading protocol like Aave providing that is very important, right? The second part of it is the user experience. And I think the user experience will evolve both from the point of view of the user experience of the application itself and the various interfaces built on top of and around Aave. But then I also think that the institutional world will start using Aave and DeFi as a set of markets and a set of financial products of their own, and then they will consume it through the contracts, right? So there's almost two levels of adoption. One level is the mainstream user going on and becoming a DeFi degen and getting a private key, which is its own user experience. And the other mainstream adoption is through the contracts, and maybe the counterparty on the other side using the contracts is the financial institution that represents the institutional client, right? I think that second one is now becoming extremely likely and might be the one from which you get actually the majority of the value, while the DeFi degen community continues to also grow, right? So I think it's imminent, and it's important for us to maintain that reliability, and then to get as much value from both. We converted more people into being DeFi end users, and we made the institutional pathway of capital into DeFi and into Aave very efficient and compliant and easy to do.
Stani, why don't you finish us off here?
Yeah, and I think we're hitting kind of like a landscape where we're starting to figure a lot of these user experience issues in terms of key management, securing the actually transactioning, and there's still some way to go, but I think that's where we're reaching, and that's going to actually create more accessibility into the space. And I do think from more from like a product standpoint, the access is and building access is really important. So I've seen a lot of RWAs where kind of like traditional financial products are reflected on chain and then sold to that more crypto-native audience. But my kind of understanding is that if we can actually find existing products in traditional finance where rest of the world has very limited access, and we can create that accessibility through on-chain tokenization, and also create the liquidity to transact back and forth, I think that's where a lot of adoption will happen. So things like trying to understand like how do we get the best ability to get yield on chain and preserve capital is going to be very important for a lot of people in this part of the world. Some other part of the world, for example, having access to US dollar and having just access to basic yield is going to be very valuable. And for a lot of people who actually want to, for example, invest, they want to invest in companies that are building in the future and want to actually access to those relatively early. So I think a lot of this technology and innovation is based on that, building access to people globally.
Great. Well, thank you both for your time. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.